Hello, and welcome to MRA's 5-Minute HR Feed, the podcast where we share quick and practical information. In the time it takes you to go grab a cup of coffee, you'll gain insights into hot topics and pressing HR issues. I'm your host, Nicole Morehouse, and we're glad you're listening. Before we start, here's our usual disclaimer that the information being shared is not and should not be considered legal advice. Now let's dive into our topic.
As summer quickly approaches, some of you are already in the process of onboarding summer interns. Offer letters have been sent, start dates have been established, and everyone is ready to kick off what is going to be a meaningful experience for both the intern and your company. Others who are listening might be thinking about designing their very first internship program. Because hiring interns requires careful attention to compliance issues to ensure adherence to a wide variety of laws and regulations, this podcast is dedicated to some helpful reminders. Failing to address compliance considerations can result, of course, in legal liabilities, but it can also result in some reputational risks. So let's talk about some key compliance issues that employers should keep in mind. This is a 5-minute podcast, so of course I won't be covering everything, but hopefully enough to set you on the course to compliance. And if you already have an existing internship program, to be able to audit what you're doing currently. Quick disclaimer, I will be talking at a high level about federal law for private for-profit organizations. First consideration, is the internship paid or is it unpaid? To pay or not to pay? One of the most critical aspects of hiring an intern is to determine whether or not they should be paid. The U.S. Department of Labor has some established guidelines under the Fair Labor Standards Act to help us do this. It includes some primary beneficiary tests, evaluating economic reality factors, and if you're really interested in a granular level of detail as to what those factors are, look up fact sheet number 71 from the Department of Labor. Fact sheet number 71 is called Internship Programs under the Fair Labor Standards Act. If you give it a quick Google search, it should pop right up. To sum it all up for you, if the internship primarily benefits the intern and meets the Department of Labor's criteria, it might, and I'll emphasize might, qualify as unpaid. Otherwise, the intern must be treated as an employee and compensated at least the minimum wage and any overtime. Some internships are offered in collaboration with their educational institution, and they may receive academic credit. Sometimes you do see this in unpaid internships. No, I'm not implying that academic credit automatically qualifies an internship as unpaid, but you do see that sometimes in those unpaid internships. Regardless, if there is a partnering institution, educational institution, make sure your internship program meets the requirements of the partnering institution and that you're going to be able to provide the necessary documentation for the student to receive the credit at the end of the internship. The last thing that you want to happen is a student intern who is expecting academic credit to have something fall through the cracks where they don't receive that credit. Another consideration that you may want to keep in mind, possibly, depending on your organization, depending on where the internship will work, perhaps look at whether or not there might be the increased potential for harassment. Interns, in terms of anti-discrimination and harassment laws, be sure you're doing the same things that you're doing for your other employees to make sure that they are working in safe conditions, have adequate training, the staff are adequately trained, and that your interns are informed of their rights and any procedures for reporting any concerns. Next, consider safety obligations, safety requirements, safety concerns, anything along the lines of safety. Some of the internships have very, very little safety concerns, and some of them maybe have some significant safety issues to keep in mind. Employers, of course, have a responsibility to provide a safe work environment for all workers, and that includes interns. So any OSHA standards, training standards, hazards in the workplace, all of those things should be evaluated prior to the onset of the internship to make sure that is all taken into consideration. Interns, of course, should be made aware of any emergency procedures and any safety procedures that you have in your organization that apply to them. And that leads to my next consideration, which are age-related limitations. If an internship program involves minors, employers must, of course, adhere to child labor laws. These laws limit the type of work that can be performed, the hours that can be worked, when the work can be performed, the equipment that can be used, whether or not it's a prohibited hazardous task, all of those sorts of things. So if there is a possibility that your internship includes hiring anybody under the age of 18, think about all of those age-related limitations and make sure that you don't inadvertently misstep there. Any topic that we cover, you could mention documentation, and so internships is not exempt from that. Employers should prepare clear documentation of their internship program, things like defining the scope of work, expected outcomes, who's involved in the internship, the length of the internship. All of these things can help set expectations, but also create some good documentation to clarify the relationship between the employer and the employee. So, for example, reviewing the language in your offer letter is advisable to ensure that the terms and conditions of the internship are described there. And that leads to another form of documentation, which is your handbook policies and benefit plans. And in my experience, this is one of the more common areas to be overlooked when it comes to evaluating everything that needs to be in place prior to beginning an internship. Before hiring an intern, make sure your handbook policies and benefit plans address the internship. Consider how those policies, paid time off policies, for example, when the intern reads that in your handbook, does it tell them that they're eligible for paid time off? Or does it tell them that they're not eligible for paid time off? And those sorts of things. Read it from the eyes of the intern and make sure that it addresses the parameters of the internship. And also consider how any policies or agreements that you use in your company, such as confidentiality, maybe intellectual property policies, consider how those might apply in an internship. And then one of the more significant things to think about before your internship begins is local compliance. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, talking at a high level, federal law, here I want to mention to you that employers must also consider state and local regulations regarding internships. Some jurisdictions are actually going to have much stricter rules than federal laws. And so employers need to research and comply with the laws in the jurisdiction in which the intern works. Of course, you're going to be well versed and understand the implications of where you're operating your business. But if the intern is working in a different jurisdiction, make sure that you're thoroughly checking into that. In conclusion, summer internships should be a very rewarding experience for both the employer and the intern. But it does, as we've noted, come with several compliance considerations that shouldn't be overlooked. So if you address these key issues, you can hopefully create a very successful and legally compliant program without reputational risk. Planning ahead, of course, ensures that the interns have the most valuable experience possible while you avoid any potential legal pitfalls. With that, I want to thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to MRA's 5-Minute HR Feed. Be sure to follow and connect with us for more podcasts and updates. If you're a member and have questions, you can always connect with MRA's 24/7 HR hotline by emailing infonow@mranet.org or by calling 866-474-6854.